Welcome to the second episode of the Bedtime Series for the Fight Club. Today we have a full house, and we are going to be talking to Maxine about her fight story, and we have sisters to support. So let's get into it.
So like Chloe said, today we have Maxine joining us, but with Maxine also comes some accessories. So Maxine's actually one of my little sister Lucy's best friends, and then Maxine's older sister is actually one of Chloe and I's good friends, Carlin. So they're just sitting in to kind of join in on the discussion. Maxine has a really powerful story that has to do with mental health, and Maxine has also been a great activist. She actually just started the Crown Project, which Lucy is repping right now. So we'll get her to talk a bit about that. And I think we would just love to start off by hearing from Maxine, why she is a member of the Fight Club. Yeah, so take it away.
Okay, so yeah, I'm Maxine. I've struggled quite a bit with mental health, ranging from depression, OCD, eating disorders, and things like that. So it was especially bad this year. Basically, through the past couple years, although it wasn't always clear to me, I've always struggled with eating. And it's something pretty scary because you won't always realize it's there. Like about when I was maybe 12, I became vegetarian and I cut back a lot of what I was eating. And I was very cautious that I remained healthy, which to me was just being thin. So yeah, in total, I lost maybe almost 30 pounds, and it was just like a really dark time for me. I was pulled out of school for a bit. And so with this, now that I'm in recovery, being like an activism for mental health and things like that is really important to me because I've been there and I know how difficult it could be, and it's really scary, but I find it's really important to talk about it as much as you can and normalize it, I guess.
I think also, especially because, and we kind of talked about this earlier, but it's really amazing that you're able to kind of be this activist and be this role model for a lot of girls, especially going to an all-girls school, being at that age. I know that eating is like a really big issue and like topic of discussion. So that's really amazing that you're actually able to like come out and talk about it, because there's so many people who almost like suffer in silence, even though it's not something that should be silenced, because so many people share that same struggle. But I think maybe could you just talk about that a bit? Like, so for the people like you struggling, what would be your advice to them, and how can you kind of realize that this needs to be something that should be combated and worked on?
Well, luckily for me and for hopefully a lot of people, I had a really good support system and great friends and family around me helping me. And for someone going through the same thing I went through, I would definitely suggest just trying to talk about it. And I know it's so scary. I remember at camp when I started to notice things were kind of bad, I was so scared. I would sit down at my phone every night trying to just call my sister, call my mom, and just explain to them what was going on. And it was so scary. And I understand that it can be the most difficult thing. But it honestly, right when you start talking about it, it instantly gets better, and it only goes up from there. The hardest part is just telling someone, and from there, it's like it just automatically starts to get better. And it's hard, but I would definitely just reach out to people you trust, and just having those people around you can support you so much and make a huge difference.
Speaking out is probably the first step, because even if you're kind of subconsciously realizing that you are going through these things, and you might think, I'm probably thinking about what I eat more than most people are, it might seem unusual to you, but once you actually say it out loud and tell someone other than yourself, that's like the first step of admitting. And I think admitting that you have a struggle is the first step, but also the hardest, but the time where it actually makes a difference, because once you're able to admit it to yourself, that's when the recovery starts. So congratulations.
Yeah.
And that's huge, especially at such a young age.
Thank you.
I agree with everything Chloe just said. Also, I think since we have like your part of your support system here, like Lucy as a friend, Carlin as a sister, I think it would also, we haven't really talked about support systems as much. So maybe just speaking to your support system, how they helped you, how if you have a friend going through this or a family member going through this, because it's so common, what they could do to help people in a similar situation, because I think those lines, like stepping over certain boundaries, are so unclear. Like you don't know when you're overstepping, how you can help your friend, whether you just ignore it and let their family take over, whether like how to be a good friend to someone, I think is really important.
Yeah, for sure. Like I found that a lot of my friends were often like, they almost felt uncomfortable. They didn't want to overstep by asking about it. That was definitely, I could see that. And I think asking if I'm just like okay and checking in just goes so far. And like when I see someone that's like maybe having a bad day or struggling, just like asking them what's up, asking them if it's okay, like I think that makes a huge difference. And even if it's not doing a big part and you're not actually like helping a lot, it shows you care. And I think that's so important, that you're just expressing that you support them and they're not alone. So that's what I would suggest doing. That's what I found really helped me.
I know how often people emphasize like check in on your friends, but you don't realize how important and powerful that is until someone like you actually speaks to that point.
I'd like to hear like Carlin's perspective on it, like how you kind of came to realize like what your role needed to be in Maxine's recovery and stuff like that.
Yeah, for sure. So I think the hardest thing about having someone you care about or someone close to you struggle with, some mental health related thing is just that you can see that they're struggling and you feel really helpless because you feel like there's not much you can do. Like at the end of the day, it does come down to the person themselves. Like they have to realize, okay, I want to get better for myself and I'm ready to take those steps. So kind of watching her like deteriorate in a way was really, really hard, like mentally and physically was so hard for me. And like, I really struggled with trying to get across to her and like calling her. I wrote her this like long letter, just being like, please, like, you're stronger than this. Like you can overcome this. Like just that part was really difficult for me. But once she came to the realization herself that, this is something I need to do for myself, and seeing how it was hard for people around her too, I think that made her realize like, okay, I'm ready to take the next steps with this and I'm ready to, tackle this like head on. Mm-hmm. So that was probably the hardest part, but I'm happy now to see that she's, taken her experience and, come up with the Crown Project. Like she's doing something with it to help other people, which I think is really cool. So
yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah.
I think you want to explain the Crown Project a bit more?
So basically the Crown Project is, something I made that it's basically hoodies, like Good Hood. And first I made just one, and my plan was to donate.
Who's wearing it?
Yeah, there it is. But my plan was to donate 100% of the profits to a place called Sick Not Weak, which is basically an organization supporting mental health, and it has online communities. It's basically just what the name is, it's diverting the like stigma around mental health to something more powerful and supportive, in that it's not a weakness and it's not a problem, but it's just you're ill and you're just sick and you can always get better when you're sick and things like that. But I found that really important, just hearing Sick Not Weak. It really spoke to me actually, because often I find people with mental health are grouped as like weak, I guess, in that when you're depressed, you're always going to be sad. Or when you're anxious, you're just going to be nervous all the time, things like that. When you have an eating disorder, you can't go out to lunch because you're just going to be, freaking out. And I know that obviously all those things can be true. It can be so hard, but I think it's more about, I don't know how to say this, but it's not someone's fault that they have mental illness. And I think that's so important because definitely when I was at my worst, it felt like it was kind of on me. So that's why I chose to do this, because I find it's really important, and the most important part is having a good community, and that's what Sick Week Not Week does. So I made these sweaters to donate to them and help fund their education system, because that's a big part of what they do. And yeah.
So going back to what you just said about education, I also think that's super important. I was actually talking to someone about this last week, but I think there's still, as far as we've come in terms of like discussing mental health and just talking about the emotions that people go through on a daily basis and the struggles that people have, we're still so far behind from an education perspective. I mean, I haven't been in high school in 4 years, but when I was in high school, there was never a formal education process of like learning about mental health, and especially being in an all-girls school, like you think that there would be some curriculum surrounding eating disorders because they're so prevalent, and like so many people I went to school with, like we all struggled with our eating to some extent. It's kind of hard not to when you're surrounded by a bunch of girls and there's a pressure to be a certain way, what have you. I think that education on things like that specifically are so important, and I kind of wanted to hear your perspective on that and like where maybe you hope to see that education process go in the next couple years. Is that like something you want to be a part of? Like, what is your view on that?
Yeah, for sure. I think it's so important, as you're saying. I think there can definitely be additions to what people are learning about mental health currently, because I just think it's so important for everyone to know, because every single person in some way or another is impacted by mental health, whether it's themselves or their family or their friends. And I think especially now, it's so prevalent in our everyday lives. So I think everyone knowing about it and knowing how to help and knowing how to cope is so important.
I think right now more people are kind of opening up about it too, because a lot of people that may have never faced any kind of struggles regarding their mental health are being put in positions where they're maybe overwhelmed with these kind of feelings. So the more education there is surrounding the topic, the more people will be able to point out if maybe their friend or a relative is acting a certain way, because they might not understand it themselves if they're not educated on the topic either. But yeah, I think it does start at a really young age, because what you're, like Eloise was saying, like what you're kind of exposed to in school and with the pressures to fit in friend groups, that all is linked to your mental health without really knowing it. So I think the more exposed you are to the problems that could happen, the easier it is to kind of keep those problems away or try as hard to help if you're in that certain situation.
Lucy, do you want to speak to that too? Like you haven't gone out of your way like Maxine to educate yourself on this, and like you're not as, I don't know, it's maybe not something as prevalent in your life. Do you feel like what you've learned in school and like what you've learned from your friends is sufficient enough to like help you cope?
I think from what I've learned from Maxine, definitely it's like really brought, like it's kind of like shed a new light on the topic. But I think really the only thing that we have, and it's once a year, is like Bell Let's Talk. But I think, yeah, it's not like a continuous thing. Like they're not bringing the topic up a lot, which is something you would expect.
There's still major holes in the system. I feel personally that there could be some major lobbying for amendments to like that curriculum, and like just how we have health class. I mean, there be a component on mental health. Like, isn't that just as important as your physical health, which is like kind of what we're learning about and like what Maxine's shedding light on right now, like Sick Not Weak.
But it's projects like the Crown Project and doing things like this that help raise awareness for it, because everyone knows now that it exists and that these problems are real, and the stigma around them needs to be lifted. And I think we're obviously making moves towards that, but at the same time, there's a huge group of people who just either don't have like the demographic. Obviously, we're really strong and we're really open as an age group, but the older demographic, to them, is still something that they don't understand, because they never really grew up with people who opened up about it at all.
I feel like too, like people want to help, but people just don't know how, or just like afraid, or don't have the proper tools to like know how to do it, right? Like people want to help, but they just don't know what steps to take, which I think
it goes back to the education point, right? Like we need to be educated on how to help, how to recognize it, how to be sensitive to it, how to be empathetic. Like there's so many different, like it's a whole other world that we only know a small divot of. Like, until you experience it, until you like learn about it formally, it's really hard to be able to navigate those situations. Also, I wanted to know, Maxine, what do you see like the future being for the Crown Project?
I haven't actually thought about it much. I wasn't expecting it to be as like successful as it was this first time around, which I'm like super happy about. But yeah, I'm not really sure. It's definitely occupying my time right now, which is great, especially during quarantine because I'm super bored. But it makes me really happy knowing that I can do something for other people and it's actually going to make a difference, because as Carlin was saying, you can feel hopeless sometimes just knowing there's people suffering and you can't really do anything about it. So I just really like how it feels. It makes me really happy. So maybe I'll take this further, but I'm not sure.
Also right now, like similar to what we're saying with Goodhood, those who are vulnerable right now, like mentally, physically, whatever, it's having a huge impact on everyone, because these are the people who feel the brunt of it, right? Like the people who already had a hard time getting motivated, getting out of bed in the morning, they're having an even harder time now. So it's really important, especially now, to kind of like shed light on to those people and what they're going through. So I think it's really great that like you're here today talking about it. Also, I admire you so much for being so young and talking about it. Like people our age were definitely not talking about this stuff in high school. It was kind of something that was swept under the rug and like something very secretive. So like no one would talk about it publicly like you're doing. So like I admire you a lot for having the bravery and the strength to sit here and talk to us.
I think also, like during this time, obviously, like you said, it's affecting people a lot differently, and it's great to be able to spread this message to other people. But also it's a time where people, just like Carlin was saying, like they just want a way to help and they might not know how, but things like you're doing is an excellent way for someone who might be sitting at home understanding what's going on and recognizing the issues that are happening in people's lives, and having a way to give back to that community or support the community and just bringing awareness to it is so huge right now, because everyone's just kind of looking for a way to give their time.
If you had to give advice to someone right now who's suffering, and especially like in the midst of Corona and everything going on, what gets you through the day? Like what helps you with your recovery? How are you coping during this time? Because I feel like a lot of people could benefit from like hearing other people's strategies or hearing what they do on a daily basis to cope.
The one thing I'd say that's really important is keeping busy. And I know it's kind of a given, but just doing things like waking up and making sure you're actually getting out of bed or going on a walk, and just keeping yourself busy is so important. It actually really helps, because not only does it just get your mind off things, but being like active and doing things is really healthy for yourself, and it's really good mentally too. For example, I remember when I was out of school, I would wake up in the morning and then I would go to work with my mom, and I would sleep on the couch all day, and then I'd go home and sleep more, and I'd literally sleep for like 24 hours a day. And it was just kind of like an endless cycle. And once I started actually getting up and starting to do things, whether it was reading a book or even cleaning my room, things like that, you start to feel so much better. So yeah, I would definitely say keeping yourself busy goes a long way.
Definitely.
For sure. And that honestly goes for everyone. Like, it's just really important to find things to do, find hobbies to do, find activities to do right now.
So bored.
Because everyone's so bored.
Yeah.
Boring.
Yeah.
And is that when you found like you were in your lowest points, is when you were bored and like had nothing to do and like felt like almost like you didn't have like there was no purpose?
Yeah, exactly. And it was like never ending, it seemed like. But I think it's so important just to remember that like no matter where you are now, you'll get over it and things will get better and you'll start to be happier.
Oh, thank you so much, Maxine. You did such a good job.
No problem.
Happy
Thank
to have,
Yeah.
a high school student on.
Purchase the crown. I'm giving you.
Round.
What's the name of your at Crown Project?
2020.
Yeah. Purchase.
And thanks, Carlin, for sharing your perspective too.
This was fun.
I loved that so much, and thank you for sharing, Maxine. I really appreciate it.
No problem.
Yeah.
Very inspirational. I think a lot of people like your age too benefit so much from this, because I think our people in our age definitely probably regret not talking about these things sooner.
Yeah.
It saved a lot of people. So
For sure.
I mean, it definitely would have saved me a lot of suffering if I had just like openly talked about things I was going through.
Yeah.
Bye.
Bye, guys.
Bye, guys. Bye.
Bye, guys.